First of all, being part of a long history of a company, that's important because you kind of remember that tradition. It kind of keeps you kind of real, recognizing that there are a lot of people who went before you, and you kind of feel a sense of responsibility to kind of hopefully do a decent job and pass it on to the next generation. But I think that also gives you confidence because there has been some longevity and there's been that history you can rely on. But you also have to be careful you don't let that history kind of not keep you from being innovative.
Just a quick reminder for you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better.
Hey, it's Ari. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Made in America podcast. Today we have a special treat. It's a two-person episode. We have two people here from Lyman Orchards. We're starting off today with John Lyman, Executive Vice President. John, thank you so much for coming on today.
Hey, Ari, how are you today?
I'm doing very well, my man. But listen, it's Made in America podcast, so always start with the same two questions. What do you make, and why do you make it?
We make lots of things. Lyman Orchards today we are farmers, we're retailers, we're manufacturers of pies, of food, and we have golf courses. So we have a lot of products and services.
You sure do. And why do you do it, John?
Well, it kind of started in 1741, and my ancestor, John Lyman, and his wife, Hope, purchased, at that time, 40 acres. And it was part of Middletown before Middlefield broke away later. But started a self-sufficient farm. In fact, he was farming in Durham with his father and his brother. His father and his brother went to Torrington. They went to Middlefield. And so started off, like I say, self-sufficient. And then over the years, tried lots of different things and kind of morphed along. And the last 25 years, we've kind of been a destination in central Connecticut with all our different operations.
Yeah, listen, I doubt there's going to be certainly anyone from Connecticut listens to this episode that's not heard of Lyman Orchards and probably been there a time or two. My family among them many times, as we talked about before the show started. 1741, huh? I mean, yeah. If I do my math correctly, that's colonial time, literally.
Right.
The Lyman Orchards, the Lyman family farm anyway, is older than the United States of America.
It is. It is. Like tell people too, in 1741, George Washington was 9 years old. That kind of puts it in perspective.
That does put some things in perspective. And why Middlefield as opposed to Torrington? Just curious if you even have any idea why.
Well, again, I'm basing on kind of reading, kind of what people have done with history. So I guess John and Hope wanted to go on their own. They had the option to go to Torrington and continue to farm with their father and brother, and they decided they wanted to go on their own. So they took a chance.
So, what, we're 8 generations now? Do I have that?
I'm the 8th generation of the original Lymans.
So I wonder if you could maybe talk me and the audience sort of through, like, what's that like? What's your insights on how it's lasted so long? How did it make it? How did it make it this far?
Well, I think it's, first of all, being part of a long history of a company. That's important because you kind of remember that tradition. It kind of keeps you kind of real, recognizing that there are a lot of people who went before you, and you kind of feel a sense of responsibility to kind of hopefully do a decent job and pass it on to the next generation. But I think that also gives you confidence because there has been some longevity and there's been that history you can rely on. But you also have to be careful you don't let that history kind of not keep you from being innovative. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you can get stuck in your own ways, and you have to constantly be looking for new things, and you have to adapt. And part of it too is the businesses we've been in, agriculture for sure, you really don't control everything. And a lot of times you'll have, situations happen, weather events, and you have to adapt. You have no choice. So the family has demonstrated over the years a lot of innovation, a lot of adaptation, and willingness to kind of look ahead and try to stay relevant by bringing new products and services all every day.
There's got to be so many business lessons that can be learned from a business and a family business that survived a Revolutionary War,
Yeah.
a Civil War, a Spanish-American War,
Right.
2 world wars, multiple pandemics, who knows how many
Right.
recessions. And I think, certainly a testament to the family duration is, an industry that I think a lot of people feel like is challenged more and more in the modern world, which is, agriculture.
Right.
I wonder, when you think about it, and you brought up something, I think it's a really important lesson for all businesses, which is you want to build on the tradition that you have, but you also have to not be a prisoner to the past, or you will not be a part of the future. I mean, my words, not yours.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if you have any lessons that you think about it, so how to thread that needle, right? How to keep the customers you have happy so the business is sustainable, but also move to the future so you could be here for the future.
Yeah, I think it's just, again, we're in a kind of retail environment now. I mean, our business is pretty much a retail-driven business. And you really have to kind of be tuned in to what people are looking to do. And we find a lot of our customers, they every year they're looking for different things. However, there is a little bit of what they like to come back to Lyman's is because they've experienced it as a kid, or they like to experience it with their children or even their grandchildren. So it's you kind of thread that balance of keeping that foundation, but also bringing new things in to keep it interesting, keep it relevant, and again, just kind of looking ahead. What are the trends? What do we need to be doing? How do we do it differently? And yet also not lose what people know us for. It is a balance.
How long have you been executive vice president?
Probably since late 80s. I came into the business full time in 1980. Started off as orchard manager and tried to kind of work my way up the level. I tell people I've done everything at Lyman's except teach golf, and you don't want me to teach golf.
So let just maybe make a very specific question. So you started in 1980. If I went back into, we use the movies, if I got into a DeLorean and did the 88 miles an hour and went back to 1980, what would be different in my experience at Lyman Orchards than what I see today?
Well, certainly we didn't have the mazes. Pick Your Own was, for us at that time, was not as big as it is now. This whole idea of agritourism, which is, for most farms in Connecticut and really through the Northeast urban areas, you've had to adapt, and agritourism, bringing people to the farm, giving them things to do, become that destination. That's really big. It was not back in 1980. We golf. At that time, we had one 18-hole course. We now have 27 more holes. And it just, the store, the bakery, was just a retail bakery. We weren't into wholesale bakery at all, and that we started.
The store that we see there today, was it there same size?
It was.
Sort of serving the same, people who haven't been there, right? I mean, it's not just a bakery. I mean, it's
Right.
a grocery, prepared foods. You
Right.
can have a great lunch, whatever.
Yeah.
Obviously get pie, but it's not just about baking.
Yeah, when we actually built the Apple Varietals, which is the store today, built that and opened in 1972. And prior to that, we had a sales room. It was seasonal. It was on this side of our packing house, different location on the farm. And when we were thinking about building, at that time, I was too young to even be part of the conversation. But my parents went up and down the East Coast, visiting farms that had expanded their retail, and talked with them and got a lot of good ideas. And one of the things that kind of resonated with them is a couple of people told them, you got to have a scratch bakery. It's really going to, it's going to be one of the fastest growing areas for you. So they put a scratch bakery in, and that's really was the start of kind of what became our wholesale business.
What's a scratch bakery?
You make your bakery products
From scratch?
From scratch.
Okay, got it.
Right.
As opposed to...
Buying an already made, purchased and or made, and you bake it off or sell it frozen. We had frozen pies at our old sales room, but we didn't make them.
Got it.
So we got into the pies, got into the donuts, the cookies, the muffins. Those really our base products, which kind of built the business.
Gotcha. And what about in terms of what you guys grow on the farm? How has that changed over time?
Well, at that time, in addition to the fruit, we were growing vegetables, and we didn't have as large a footprint for our small fruit. So we've expanded our small fruit. And we grew a lot more apples. We were much more of a wholesale operation. We, over the years, have reduced our apple acreage, focused on the retail, the pick your own, and supplying the apples for our pies. So we kind of looked for ways to get more direct to our customer and control our destiny a little more than just on a wholesale level where it's kind of the whims of the wholesale buyer.
So the apple orchards that we walk through when we go apple picking with our family, that's not where you guys do picking for the pies. It's a different area.
Yes and no. I mean, we got certain orchards that are, you won't get to pick your own out there, but those go for the pies. And then part of that area, we'll pick the tops. So for instance, where people can't pick it,
Right.
We'll go through ahead of time and pick the tops. So it's integrated into the mix. So it's, and the varieties have changed. No one ever heard of Honeycrisp back in 1980.
Shame on them.
Yeah, and there's so many new varieties. It's kind of dizzying to the consumer.
Well, since you brought it up, I'll ask the question because I noticed that actually this year when we went, I'm like, I don't even remember that varietal from before.
Right.
Like, where do all these come from? I mean, there's just people are inventing new apple varietals. Like, what's the deal there?
Yeah, I don't know what the total exact number is, but I believe there's over 3,000 or it could be 7,000 varieties worldwide.
Really?
And part of it is the genetic diversity of the apple, the seed itself. If you plant a seed, you're not going to get the same variety. It's just, don't ask me exactly why, but it is the way it is. But you just, so you get a lot of sort of these sport varieties that pop up and then they breed as well. They crossbreed and try to, get the best attributes of certain varieties. So, and it's, a lot of companies are investing in what they call club varieties where they're trying to get a special variety they're known for. Mm-hmm. So it's a whole mix of different ways in which new varieties are coming onto the market. And for a grower who has a decision to make and then have basically 20 or 25 years to live with it, it could be a little daunting. What is a customer going to like 10 years from now?
Right.
So we stick with our basics. We have, varieties that have been good for 50 years, and we stay with those, and we try to, sprinkle in and bring in some of the new varieties. And if there are some
market test them a little bit, see if people...
and if there are ones that are definite, you go all in. You put a whole bunch of acres in for that as well. So it's, but that's the number one dilemma for fruit growers today is what's the right variety to plant.
There you go. What is a fruit grower? Keeps them up at night. Now we know the answer.
Yeah.
So as you think about, I presume you're thinking about carrying from the 8th generation to the 9th generation.
Right.
So how much of the family is in the business and how do you currently, and how do you think about that transition period?
Yeah. Well, I kind of answer the question probably in 3 levels. First of all, we're a corporation. We're family owned. So with that, now we are over 200 shareholders. So you have 200 family owners. And it could be, scary. Gary may have gotten scared by that when he heard that. But we have a board of directors, and on the board is outside non-family members, but also family members. So involvement in the family happens at the board level, and then certainly within the operation. Right now, currently, I'm the only Lyman family member in the business directly. Oh. But there'll be opportunities. I mean, the business has diversified, expanded, and so we'll be looking for opportunities for interested family members who have the skills. Because that's the other thing as we've developed is like so many other family businesses, you have to say, how do you select the people that are going to come into business and make sure it's a good match? Both ways. The business doesn't want somebody that doesn't want to be there, nor does someone want to go in and not want to be there and then be miserable. So it's, as a family business trying to figure that out. So we're in the process now of thinking about that generational change and transfer as we move forward. But the family's very much committed to the land. We have 1,100 acres in Middlefield. And, people say, how do you jive agriculture and golf? Well, my dad explained it best. He said it's open space use of the land. Mm-hmm. So we're not developing it. We're keeping it open space, and we need to be productive, and we need to have it make money. And so whether you farm or whether you have golf courses, it's open space use. Mm. And families, that's our biggest resource, and the family is very much devoted and dedicated to retaining that land and finding ways to keep it productive.
1,100 acres from 40.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's been that's quite a growth story.
It is
over
yeah.
the years. So on that point, so you have a process you're going through to try and recruit someone else in the family who wants to take over from you? And did you go through a similar process?
No, that's another change. 1980. At that time, my dad was really the only family member directly involved in the business, and and it was kind of, well, Jack's two sons, we'll go back into business, and I always at that time didn't want to say, well, I'm going because it is expected. I want to make sure I go in because I want to. Mm-hmm. And after college, I went and spent a year farming in Holland, working on an apple orchard, and I found out in the year there that I really did like growing apples, and I did want to come back into business. And so I came back. My brother joined a business and was with it for about 20 years, and then he's on his own now, left. Today, selecting is going to be different than it was for me. And a lot of it is we have a really good management team that's not family. And so you want to make sure you have the right process in place so that those who have devoted their life and their effort don't feel as though they're passed over because it happens to be a family member. So very strong feeling on the board about that too.
Yeah, that's not an easy not an easy needle to thread, I suppose.
Exactly. Yeah.
What's it like being a farmer in 2022 in central Connecticut?
Well, it's I guess you have to be tuned into the market. If you produce something that nobody wants, that doesn't make any sense, right? And we have so many tools now available to kind of try to be tuned into the market.
Such as?
With social media, with just the internet, just knowing what people are thinking, watching trends, and all the data you can get, So that's part of it. And then obviously rules, regulations. We're not the only industry that have gone through, having to deal with more and more. And again, I always tell people agriculture is a business. I mean, it's like every other business in Connecticut. We have the same challenges that every manufacturing business, every insurance business, whatever the business is in Connecticut, we all face the same challenges. And so dealing with that. And then I think the other piece of it is land use issues, and being able to continue to do the things that you need to do, despite the fact that some people in the community might feel otherwise. And you have to keep those relations good, mm-hmm. and keep that communication open and work together. And then just, again, be innovative, look for opportunity. And so much is coming down the road. The technology, agriculture is starting to adapt it, probably late to that phase for what some of the other industries are doing, but it's coming, whether it be use of robotics within certain aspects of the business or just that artificial intelligence and application of all the different things that decisions that get made. So yeah, it's not just, I think the farmer has an image of being, kind of salt of the earth and, roll up the sleeves and go to work, but you have to really be smart too. And I would say the encouraging thing in Connecticut is that agriculture in general has a lot of very talented individuals that are running these farms. Do you have peers, like other farmers that you sort of do peer grouping with? Because sure. One of the things I heard you repeat over and over again, which I think is so important in every business, is get close to your customer. Yeah, right. Exactly. It's impossible to go wrong if you're listening to what customers want. Right. I mean, that's understanding what's out there. So that's terrific. Yeah. And the other piece that you'd mentioned, even talking about your dad's story, is sort of learning from peers. What are other people doing? What are they seeing success in? Right. You can make your own mistakes and learn from them, but if you can learn from some other people's mistakes, maybe get yourself up that learning curve faster. Are you taking advantage of that as well? Absolutely. And the fruit industry has had a really strong, to that point, strong industry association. Connecticut, it's called the Connecticut Pomological Society. Pomological Society. Learned a new word today. Yes. Check my box. That's right. Started in 1895. Okay. So it's a youngster compared to Lyman. Yeah, exactly. But that's been important because get together annually to have an annual meeting, talk about different things, but also have the networking within. I've a half dozen orchards I can call at any time just to bounce things off, and that's really important to have that. Mm.
So I want to sort of convert movement towards the business conversation. You brought something up earlier, which I thought was interesting. And I want to talk about governance and then sort of day-to-day management. So you mentioned there's sort of a board of directors, and I wonder, how did that come to pass, if you know, and what is the relationship between sort of the staff that works, you as the, one of the operational leaders, and then the board? I assume you're on the board as well.
Yeah.
Kind of maybe help people understand that interplay.
Yeah. So the Lyman Farm was incorporated in 1949. Prior to that, it had been basically a partnership or a sole proprietorship. And my grandfather and his 5 siblings decided to incorporate as a way to help the transition to the next generation. So originally 6 shareholders in 1949. Today, flash forward over 200. But obviously established.
Everybody wants a piece of a successful thing, but go ahead. Yeah.
Established a board of directors, obviously incorporated, and that board has changed in number on the board over the years. But one of the things that my grandfather and my dad felt was really important, as I mentioned earlier, was having outside non-family members on the board to, bring in that perspective, that get it outside the family view and see the business for what it is and be able to offer insight and experience to the table. So that's been really invaluable. Today we're made up of, there's 9 shareholders, or 9 stockholders, or I'm sorry, 9 board of directors, and there's 5 family members and 4 outside. We have the ability to have 2 others, and we'll look to bring in some other talent as we can find the right match. So that's, that's really important. And then obviously, like so many other corporations, governance has become more and more important, certainly with the regulations and all the kind of abuses that took place during the 2000s. So we try to stay on top of that. And so that, having good representation, responsibility to the shareholder, and that open communication. And I kind of wear 3 hats. I'm a shareholder, I'm a manager in the business, and I'm a stockholder or a board of directors. So, I've got to wear 3 hats from time to time. And it's important that this board kind of represent the family or understand what the family's needs are, but also be a little bit detached from that to be able to offer, a view that's more objective.
Do you think that having that outside perspective and having it from such a, early, meaning, 80 years ago, not necessarily early in the Lyman Orchards, but so a long time ago, do you think that that's been part of what's helped keep moving forward and not get, I'm not sure what the right phraseology is, I'll say, not be a prisoner of tradition?
Yeah.
Is that outside thing that's helped?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing, since 1997, when my dad retired, the board has actually been 4 CEOs that have been in position in that time, and they've all been non-family members. So the board has always felt it's important to get the right person for the time, for the business, and not feel it's got to be a family member. And that's been really, really important. And yeah, absolutely, that outside perspective has been critical. When we were going from dairy farming to golf courses, we had a couple guys on the board who either were in the golf industry or had experience with the golf industry and could offer insight that way. So yeah, it's been invaluable over the years.
Well, listen, you guys are definitely doing something right out there. Not only just the longevity isn't just a testament to it, though certainly that's a big marker, but anyone who's been out there and seen the quality operation, had the opportunity to experience it, but the food and the experience of being there has walked away enjoying it. So kudos to you guys for doing that.
Thank you.
Well, listen, John, I'm gonna take this opportunity to move over to Gary, who's the current CEO, and maybe get his perspective. But thanks for coming on today.
Okay. Thanks, Ari.
Hey, Gary, thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having us on.
Well, listen, I want to hear a lot about your role at Lyman Orchards. We heard from John that the family has opted to have a non-family member CEO. I think you're the 4th one since the beginning of 2000s. And I wonder just how you think about sort of taking on this role with storied history and really interesting Connecticut business.
I think it's a great question. I would say a little scary coming into it because that there is such a rich history there. I think, when you look at over the span of my career, most of it's been working kind of on, companies that are owned by private equity groups, where there's really not that, kind of relationship or the emotion that's there. And so this would definitely be the first time I came into a company that has a lot of emotion, and which in and of itself had its own challenges as you kind of work through it, especially in the kind of the beginning stages. But, it's been a lot of fun. And, as John indicated earlier, we do have a board that's made up of, I think we have 5 family members that are on the board that come from different wings of the family. And so they all have kind of different perspectives on how the business should be run, different kind of objectives, if you will. And I think in the beginning, I think coming from a traditional kind of board of directors where it's made up of either investors or outside board members, it took a little bit of time to kind of acclimate to this new environment. And, John has always has been, kind of a champion of mine, if you will, especially the first 2 years, where, I want things done quicker, and, you want to be able to kind of move at a certain rate. And it doesn't typically happen that way in a family-owned company. No. And John has been good about really kind of highlighting the successes that we have had, especially, like I said, in the early, probably the first year or two.
So, you've been with the business since 2018, and I do have a bunch of questions on all that, but you just reminded me that I didn't really get your history. So I wonder if maybe you could talk about sort of like what brought you here, what's been the experience up to, because I think you started with Lyman in 2018, right? So kind of what brought you into this business? What intrigued you or interested you in sort of a farming manufacturing operation?
Well, that's a really great question. I'm not sure I would say that I was intrigued by the farming aspect. So over the course, as I mentioned earlier, most of my career has been, working for private equity-owned companies, and typically they've been in various forms of distress. Mm-hmm. And so usually what happens is when you turn the company around, it gets put up for sale, and then at that point you're basically back on the market again. And so
you were more in the turnaround side of PE side, so not sort of like PE roll-up strategy or whatever, but more in the turnaround. So
exactly.
PE would come into a business that was struggling, buy it in the hopes they could turn it around and.
Well, was typically they would come in and buy a company that they thought was a great company. Okay. And then when they started digging into it, realized that they didn't, they bought the wrong asset.
Got it.
And at that point, usually what would happen is they go through kind of this iterative process of bringing, kind of rolling through people. And then I, have typically have come in, kind of that, maybe year 4, year 5. Like most private equity groups have a 5 to a 7 year time horizon. And so at year 5, when they realized that the companies weren't delivering the way that they thought they were going to, they would start making management changes. And usually at that point in time is where I would come in. So in this particular case, I was in between, I was in a transitional position. And so I wasn't working. And my wife and I, funnily enough, having lived in Connecticut for 20 plus years, had never gone to Lyman Orchards. And that summer, we actually took a trip down there. And so I think it was probably like 2 months later I had seen on a job board that they didn't specifically say Lyman Orchards, but the way they described it, it was pretty clear that there's only one family-owned company that has golf and has agri-payment and pick your own orchards and a bakery. And as it worked out, I was interviewing for a couple of the positions. The day that I got an offer from one company was the same day I got an offer from Lyman Orchards, and we just went back and forth. And the other company was a private equity-backed company. In this case, in consulting with my family, this position was going to be out of state. And here I was going to have an opportunity in state with obviously a kind of a company that has the heritage that Lyman Orchards has. So my family, really said, "Listen, I think this is the right thing for you to do." And in hindsight, over the past 3+ years, it's been, I would say, they were right. It was a great decision, and we've had a lot of fun. I mean, John mentioned that we have a really strong management team. And I think coming off of the years that we had prior to my arrival, where there were a lot of ups and downs to the business, mostly from a profitability standpoint. And the goal of the board and kind of searching for the kind of the replacement for the the kind of the incoming CEO, if you will, they were looking for somebody that could really work with them on lessening the dependency on weather-related businesses. And the year I joined, which was 2018, I think it was November. We finished the year with the worst financial performance in the history of the company. And that particular year was, I think, very wet. So all of the, the on-property businesses, whether it was golf or with the orchard or things like that, if you have a rain-out weekend, you really lose a lot of revenue. And in that industry where most of your cost of goods are the fertilizers and kind of the effort that goes into keeping the grounds, intact, when you have a rain out, that's
when your cost of goods are almost fixed costs.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, yeah,
so that if you lose out on 100,000 or 200,000 in revenue on a weekend, that's profitability. And so in that particular case, it was a very wet year, and they were just looking for somebody that could come in and help them turn the business around, with more of an emphasis on building the kind of off-property businesses. And if you look at over the span of my career, I've been in the food industry for 30 plus years.
Okay, so that's what I was going to ask you.
So,
Were you in food business? Okay.
Exactly. So
that was the tie-in.
I've been in ice cream, I've been in baked goods, I've been in meat. I mean, pretty much every category throughout the supermarket, and mostly in sales and operations roles. And so that's where I think kind of the background. And previously, I had been the CEO of a bakery. So we didn't do pies, but we did other baked goods within the natural food space. And so I think that that background really fit me, well for, kind of the opportunity to grow the pie business.
That connects it. So yeah, let's kind of talk about that. I think when I was on with John earlier, he talked about sort of things outside of their control. Any business that's experienced the supply chain hiccups in the pandemic knows about outside of your control. But, how do you think about, disintermediating something as uncontrollable as the weather? I mean, if you're a land-based business trying to get as much as you can off 1,100 acres, it seems like you're kind of tied to weather in a lot of ways. So how do you think about that?
Well, I think if you break the businesses apart, if you look at on-property versus off-property, obviously the easiest solution is what's the most expeditious way to grow your off-property revenues? Because barring...
What's the mix, just really quickly? Because we talked about the golf, we talked about the mazes, we talked about the bakery, we talked about the pick your own, and obviously then there's the wholesale and the growing and the supplying of your own pie materials, which are still pretty weather dependent. Not as bad of just a rain out weekend, but still pretty weather dependent. So what's the off-property?
So right now, this year, it should be a little more than 50%. When I joined the business, the off-property business was 30%. Okay. And so we had 70% of our revenues, really committed to, having a really great weekend. So now we've significantly lessened that dependency. It's come with, it has its challenges, and I think when we talked earlier this week that we had been doing all of our pie manufacturing in the Apple Barrel, which is the store that we have on the property. And we knew that the only way that we're going to scale up the wholesale revenues on the pie business was by getting out into a traditional or kind of a normal manufacturing facility. So we just got lucky where there was a company that went bankrupt in New Haven, and they had 2 manufacturing facilities that were just so happened to be pie manufacturing facilities. So you couldn't get any luckier.
No, I was going to say.
So we were successful at buying the company.
Somebody could have left you to them in their will. That might have been one step luckier.
Exactly.
But, yeah.
So it's been great, but at the same time, as I think you referenced earlier, is that right now coming out of the pandemic, there's a host of supply chain issues. So we're trying to navigate that. And in addition to it, you have 2 facilities that have significantly greater overhead than what we had with the store.
Sure.
And so we're just kind of working through some of those.
Yeah, because the store sort of built, maybe you need more capacity, and there's obviously some cost of goods for the baking and the pies, but a large portion of the Apple Barrel is probably already built up into your cost of goods, that your fixed costs already. So
exactly. So things like rent were shared. Well, not rent, but electricity or utility costs. We had no rent. Because we owned the building. So there were just a number of factors that made that business more profitable when it was on the property. But when you look at it longer term, and I think that really that goes to everything that we've done over the past 3 years is setting really a vision. And so, the vision that we have for the wholesale bakery over the next 3 to 5 years is to, close to quadrupling the size of our wholesale bakery business. And so by doing that, we're going to leverage the fixed costs of the new acquisition and ultimately get to the point where all of the profitability that we can get from the wholesale bakery can cover the entire operational cost for the organization. So then whether or not you have a bad weekend is going to be immaterial, to, kind of the profitability of the company.
When you buy a business out of bankruptcy, did it come with any customers, or is it really just equipment, land?
It's a good question. Depends on the kind of bankruptcy. In this particular case, they actually did file Chapter 11, which under most cases, you could actually buy a business that kept operating. They filed Chapter 11, but they shut it down. And so, and I'm sure there were tactical reasons for doing that. But what happened was in closing down in, I think, the end of June, we actually closed on the purchase in October, so they went for a good 4 or 5 months with having no business. Fortunately, the company did have a good reputation, especially for cream-filled pies, and so we brought our own customer base to the mix with the fruit-filled pies. So really, once we get it up and running, getting the cream-filled pie business back into the marketplace was relatively easy.
So from your perspective, the goal is to maintain what's going on property, but really increase the manufacturing off property to try and do the pie business, which then goes not just sold on premise, but then goes through other retail channels as well, which is your expertise.
Correct. And we currently do. I mean, our pie business, and I think a lot of people are unaware of this, is we sell up and down the East Coast. And so we sell to, in the industry, it's called private label. So if you went into, let's say, Big Y, you would see our brand being sold there. But if you went into a number of other retailers up and down the East Coast, and whether it was a tart or crostata or a pie, it could be manufactured by Lyman Orchards, and there's a very good chance that it is.
No kidding. So the Lyman Orchard pies aren't only sold in the Lyman Orchards brand?
Correct.
Interesting. And it looks like you guys are branching out a little bit. For people that are watching, you can see it on the table probably. For those of you that are listening, there's also some fermented beverages that we're into right now. Maybe you want to talk about those?
Yeah, so we had, in 2018, we launched a hard cider business with a manufacturer, I think out of Massachusetts. The economics of it weren't quite right. And so without getting into all the gory details, basically we pulled it off the shelf and kind of restarted. And so we found a local manufacturer. It took a little bit of time to work with the federal government and the state government on getting all of the proper permits in place. But once we did, then we found a manufacturer that's in the state of Connecticut in Wallingford, smaller entrepreneur that we partnered with that, he's actually co-packing the product line for us. And then we purchase from, we bring it into our warehouse, and then we sell it to distributors throughout the state.
So do you guys provide the underlying apples and all that, or the recipe, or how does that work?
We provide some of the apples, and but we did, we work on, I mean, the recipe formulation was our formulation. We went in and hired an R&D company just, specifically to replicate what we're looking for. And then from a marketing standpoint, the labels and kind of all the selling and marketing aspects of it are done by us.
And so are there other products in the future to kind of keep building on the brand and continue to kind of build into that?
There are. It's a great question. I mean, we had, one of the things that I noticed coming into the company, 3 years ago is that the brand has just incredible, brand awareness throughout the Northeast. And if you're wearing a Lyman Orchards shirt, and you could be in an airport in Chicago, and people are gonna be like, "Oh my God, like I love Lyman Orchards." So it's recognizing that the brand has that kind of value. Really, one of the things that we built into our strategic plan was how do we get into other product lines that fit with who we are and what our brand is. So there is going to be a line. We are looking to expand the line of pies to go into kind of a branded set in the frozen category. But with other products that we wouldn't manufacture, we're looking at things like jams and jellies, and fruit-based jams and jellies. We're looking at the possibility of doing seltzer water with a fruit-infused seltzer water. So we're looking at all of these different categories that really can leverage the strength of the brand, kind of, I'd say, up and down the I-95, I-91 corridor, so between New York, New Jersey, and Boston, where the brand really has its its greatest strength.
Yeah, a lot of cachet. So that really was that part of the process during your interview and the thought process of sort of laying out that vision where your experience can really help to build that?
I'm not sure if that actually came out in the interview. I think what they were looking at is that the background, especially having run another bakery and have gone through a similar circumstance where it was a distressed bakery. We turned the company around in about 3 or 4 years, and so I think they looked at that saying, okay, this is really going to be the catalyst to growing our wholesale bakery operation. But one of the things that I did when I came in, and I think one of the things that the company was missing in probably maybe the previous 5 or 10 years before I joined, was really not having a vision. And a game plan on how do you go about kind of attacking, what it is that you want to achieve. And so the first thing I did in, I'd say the first 3 months was I built a 5-year strategic plan that was broken out by business unit and said, kind of here's what we need to do. And then I supported the team on executing those plans over the course of 2019, 20, and 21. And so, but in that strategic plan on the wholesale development, I did get into the details of here are the other categories that we could go after that really kind of leverage the core of who we are, which is an agricultural, fruit growing company in central Connecticut.
So I was going to ask you about a couple things and maybe weave them together, which is, you've got so many different things going on. And I mean, it's not a small operation, but it's not a huge operation either. But I don't know how much overlap there is from like a culture, employee style, and a management between running a golf course, growing apples, running a retail store, manufacturing pies, and sort of having a tourist destination. how do you sort of thread that needle to kind of get that all working together and manage all of it successfully when there's, at least from the outside, would seem kind of disparate?
It's, again, another great question. I think it really comes down to the team, right?
Yeah.
And so the first thing I did in, probably the first 6 months of, being with the company was I assessed the team. So I looked at the individuals who were running the different businesses, whether it was our golf operations or, John was heavily involved in the orchard operations, the store, you name it. And at that point in time, just made a decision on, okay, are they, essentially, and you hate to look at it this way, but are they keepers or are they not keepers?
Yeah, A player. Or
exactly.
player,
Are they the people that are going to be able to, execute the vision that you've laid out? And, the determination was that they were. And I think that the biggest challenge that the company had, with, I'd say, my predecessor was that although I think he was a great guy and understood the business, inside and out, was much more of he wanted to be controlling of every aspect of the business. And to me, if you have the right team that's in place and you give them the right direction and then give them the latitude and the flexibility to really do what they've been hired to do, you're going to see success or you're going to see results. And that's really what we did. I mean, the biggest change I think that we had in 2019 was, just really kind of decentralizing kind of the management of the individual business units and empowering the people that were running the companies to make decisions. And so we went, it's one of these factors that you love to say when you're talking to people, but we went from 2018 being the worst financial performance in the history of the company to 2019 being the best financial performance in the history of the company. And weather played a factor. I mean, we had a beautiful, 2019.
Take all the luck you can get, my man. Take all the luck
exactly.
you can get. Yeah.
But we actually, I mean, it was funny because when 2019 was amazing. 2020, which started out as being a really scary year, we had another record-breaking year on the bottom line. Both on the top and the bottom line. And
really? So that's actually surprising because given what I would imagine is the need for people to arrive to do stuff, I guess it's outside, but it just felt like the 2020 summer would have been a rough one. Fall.
And we were anticipating. We fully thought that. I mean, when I remember having conversations with people as the state was shutting down things like golf courses, and
right.
Golf courses can be when it's going well, it can be really profitable, and when it's not, I mean, it's there's a lot of money that gets invested in golf courses, and so I don't want anybody to think that you're just printing cash when you see kind of a golf course full. I mean, it's over the past 3 years, I think we've put close to $3 million into our golf course operation, and so it's a really expensive endeavor, and you have to do it right if you're going to be able to position yourself to get the people into the parking lot, but. Because it was an outdoor activity, I mean, things like, coming to the Apple Barrel and just having, grabbing a sandwich, but then having a picnic outside. And we work closely with, the kind of the local officials in Middlefield on how do we kind of work with this on like positioning out squares. We actually had squares painted on the grass. So
did you?
Oh, we did.
Oh, nice.
Because we wanted to provide an environment where people could come and feel safe, but also be outdoors and enjoy themselves with their family. And so I think that, we successfully executed that. And so we, 2020 surprisingly was just an incredible year on the both top and the bottom line.
That's fantastic. So going back to sort of managing the different businesses, you talked about empowering leaders. And I think this is a really important business topic because it's easy to say, hard to do. And so just, I don't know if you've maybe talk about what the difference is between how you go out and empower someone to do something versus abdicating your responsibility, giving them the right guidance to be successful, but then not over managing. I don't know if you have thoughts people could take away from that.
Yeah, I think, and I can't say that this is the recipe that everybody can follow and it's going to be successful, but, in addition to giving people the latitude, the business unit managers, the ability to, run their businesses, we had monthly meetings. And so it was one of the things where, I wanted them to have the enjoyment of managing their business, but I also wanted them to have feel the weight of the responsibility by having to present to their peers. So what would happen is every month, and once we had the financials done, we would sit down as all the business unit leaders, and they would have to go through line by line on top line, kind of the expenses, the bottom line, what's working, what's not. And so I think by having that additional pressure of just knowing that that they are accountable, that elevated I'd say the level of responsibility with the team. And so I think that we did that all through 2019. We didn't do it quite as aggressively in 2020 because things were just, seemed like they were really clicking. And right now, because of the acquisition we just made in New Haven and the cost of it, we're going back to doing the same thing. So
bring it back. We got to play the one that works, right? Got to play those hits. How do you think about sort of culture in the business? Is it a unified culture? Like if I know that there are different business units, if I worked at the golf course or I was, working with the orchards growing, would I feel sort of related to each other very directly? Is it very different?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that the answer is they are disparate businesses, as you mentioned earlier, and I think that we haven't done as good of a job as we could have to bring everybody together and make it feel like one company. And I think what you tend to find, and I can't speak for John on this on the orchard team. And again, John talked about 1,100 acres. That's a lot of space. Yeah. So the orchard
could not see people for a long time
easily.
Yeah,
and I mean, so you have the orchard operations are in one part of the. I mean, literally, it's on the other side of a highway.
Right.
And so that's where their offices are. That's where they tend to congregate. You have the store personnel, which they're in their own little kind of world there, and then we have the golf operations. And now with the wholesale bakery, we're in New Haven. Yes. So we really we're spread out throughout not only Middlefield but now the state. And something came up. I forget. It was one of our employees was having a conversation with me, not that long ago, and that was her recommendation. She's like, "How do we bring people together where we have either quarterly meetings or we just at the restaurant? We just did this. I want to say it was sometime last month where we shut the restaurant down at 7 o'clock, or maybe it was at 4 o'clock, and we brought people in from New Haven from the store and basically just said." We're going to have, a free meal, and we're just going to, kind of give away gifts and be social. So I think we can always do a better job at that. And I think that that's where you start to have that culture crossover where, people can start talking about the things that, maybe the challenges that they're facing. They can realize that, some of their peers and, maybe a half mile down the road are facing the same, challenges. But I think having more of an open dialogue, I think, is going to improve that.
Yeah, listen, that's a business challenge everybody's facing. And it's been, at least my experience, running offices in 7 different states. It's a daunting challenge, especially in a time where, you couldn't get together or you certainly don't want to, some people don't feel comfortable getting together. So that didn't help. But it does help, I think, to get different people together because they have different perspectives and can help solve problems sort of organically in ways we can't do inorganically.
Exactly.
So, yeah, that's great. What's sort of the future look like in your mind, 5 years down the road? Well, I guess you're almost at the end of your 5-year plan, but, what does it kind of look like the future for Lyman Orchards and that business in the middle of Connecticut?
I mean, there's a number of ways that we can go, right? I mean, obviously the wholesale business, I mean, we have, pretty lofty goals. And as I said earlier, we're really looking at, I think just on the wholesale bakery, we have the ability to increase our revenues probably 4x from where we are right now. And which at that point, gives us a lot more wherewithal to invest on the on-property. And part of the strategic plan was how do we grow our off-property businesses, take the revenues and the profitability from that and reinvest it back into the experience, if you will, on the farm. Earlier, I think when you started the conversation with John, you said, what do you manufacture? And the first thing that kind of went through my head was we manufacture experiences.
Yeah.
And it's key to what we are and really at kind of the root of who the company is. And so there's so many things that we could do on property that would be easily pushed into the 7, maybe the low 8 figures. I mean, we have, it's on I think the National Historic Register for the homestead, which is this, white house as you're turning to go down to the golf course. That building alone, we could put $2 million into it to renovate. And it's just $2 million that we don't have right now for something that really is more of an aesthetic element of the property. But there's so many things we can do on the property to enhance the experience for consumers. And we could turn that into, and I'm not saying that we would, but we could turn it into a bed and breakfast. Or there are things that you could do to beautify the on-property. And then there's other things that, from a customer experience, I mean, and I'm throwing these are just ideas, but Topgolf is a new kind of experience out there for golfers, and golf is a major thing, major part of our business, and it's probably right now it may be about kind of a quarter of our revenue, quarter to maybe a third of our revenue. And so if we can enhance that experience by leveraging the location, and I mean, I've heard you talking to John saying that you and your family have been to the property. I mean, it's a gorgeous property.
Beautiful.
And so if you can have the Topgolf and you can have the restaurant right there, and so you can tie those two businesses, together and give consumers an experience that they wouldn't, most consumers that aren't golfers aren't going to go experience Topgolf, or they wouldn't go to golf like just a driving range, but with Topgolf they would, because they can go there and now it's more of a fun, kind of engaging thing with your friends and family, and it's not about competition. So, I mean, those are just a couple of examples that we could, do on the property. I mean, we've had conversations about, the possibility of bringing in a summer concert series. And because when you look at the driving range, I mean, we have all this land that you could just, put it right down there. You could have, different bands come in on a Saturday, Sunday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. So there's really a lot of potential for the property. It's just, it all costs money. And that's where, obviously.
Well, we've got limits, I guess, Gary, is what it all. But listen, what I really love to hear is that the investment in the off property isn't in an effort to sort of get rid of and get away from sort of the, John called it agritourism. It's more than, I mean, that is part of it, but it's more than that. And you've talked about the different experiences. And if you've been around Central Connecticut in business and living long enough, you've probably been there to pick an apple. You've probably been there to do the corn maze. You've probably been to the golf course for an event. You've been invited to play golf there, right? So it sort of comes up in all these different things. And so enhancing in that just seems like a really smart way to continue to grow the business and build on what's honestly a very impressive legacy.
It really is. It's exciting. I mean, and I think that's kind of a great way. I'm not sure if we're wrapping it up right now, but that's a great way of wrapping it up, because I think as I started, our conversation, just said that it's interesting doing this for a family-owned company versus a private equity group. And because, I mean, it's, we do have 200 shareholders, but I can say that I honestly interact with, probably a good 20 or 30 of them on a regular basis. And so knowing that what you're doing is building this legacy that's going to go on. I mean, John said he's part of the 8th generation. John has a couple grandkids, actually a few grandkids, and so they're part of the 10th generation. So knowing that we can, build this into a legacy that can go on for another 300 years is pretty powerful.
That's pretty cool. You don't get that opportunity every day, do you, Gary?
Exactly.
Yeah. Does that? And I probably should have wrapped it there, but I do want to just sort of ask, do you think about that? Like, do you think about your role in this chain and responsibility to help see it be not just remain successful, but to be even more successful, after your time there than even when you got there? Absolutely.
And I think that, one of the things that you asked John about was, and not that so much that there's a succession plan, but it's, how do we have more family members get involved? And I don't know if there is a right or wrong answer to this. But one of the things that John and I've had, many conversations about is, as the company grows, and we're fortunate as an organization to have, I would say, a pretty deep bench. And there are a number of people, especially in the 9th generation, they're in that kind of 30 to 40-year-old range, that are really talented, highly educated, and they just haven't had, because their company wasn't doing that well financially, that we really couldn't bring that talent in from, kind of the private sector that's out there or the public sector that they're working in. And so now I think we're positioning ourselves from a financial standpoint that we can pay competitive wages to, individuals that may be interested, that are a part of the 9th generation, that want to come into the company. And so I've said to John a number of times that, I still probably have a good, 5 to 10 years left that I can envision myself working. But it would be nice at some point in time to identify, 3, 4 people from that generation, bring them into the company and start working with them on, understanding the different businesses and kind of see where it goes. Because it would be neat to see, a family member be the next CEO of Lyman Orchards.
Well, that's a pretty cool goal, Gary. And I said, listen, as somebody who's lived in Connecticut for a long time and a big Connecticut supporter, it's awesome to see this history kind of growing. I'm glad to have learned so much about it today, and wish you guys all the luck in the future.
Well, thank you very much. It was great being here.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by CompassMSP.
Thanks for listening and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a strong manufacturing community, and it would be impossible to do without all of you.